systems we talk about, both the systems talked about in the story, are so oppressive and so repressive. There is that urge for a person who exists in that context to kind of dismantle the system in any way that in the littlest of ways, diba? Even Ma'am Bethina mentioned of how that temporary bliss of taking out the tooth without anesthesia was so much for that dentist kasi that was against someone in power, that was towards a dictator. So both Montag and Aurelio take justice into their own hands towards the mayor and VP. Why did these protagonists, quote unquote, take these necessary courses of action? And the question is, were these actions actually necessary? And actually, how far justifiable is necessary nung parang, and I'm getting into Freire na do we become the oppressors? Does the oppressed become the oppressors when we take these necessary actions?
This kind of play is not as simple of us versus them mentality. It's not as simple as that, because in terms of colonialism, the natives themselves can be complicit. As you can see naman from Fahrenheit 451, si Betty yung ano yung there's a certain character that who's also a fireman, pero ano pala siya, he was also gunning na patayin niyo na lang din ako because I'm also enlightened, pero and such. So it's not, it's again, it's the natives can be complicit. And then I really want to emphasize on this, that every act of unmasking uses the very tools it condemns, falling prey to the practices it exposes. The very fact that you're practicing already, that you're a vigilante and you are doing or taking justice into your own hands, you are succumbing to the very system that you said does not matter. You are becoming as well, kasi pinosisyon mo na din yung sarili mo in that regard. That's why Bart said, never presume I will not act on my words. So yeah, kasi take for example Parasite, the movie Parasite, 'di ba? Yung pagkakaano pa lang, nawala yung lumang parasite, but then again a new parasite comes, right? So it's the same thing. When you're becoming the very monster that you swore against to.
Yeah, I agree. And you were asking a while ago how justifiable or necessary is that, no? Putting justice in the hands of Montag, or of course or Aurelio as well. I guess because they were helpless and hopeless in a systemic problem. That's why I would agree. Of course, it's debatable to say, is it necessary? Is it good or evil? But these are not the questions that we should be asking. If it's okay, if it's not okay. But I guess it's necessary. I agree. Because they were helpless. They were hopeless. And the problem is a systemic problem. Necessary when people do not have anywhere to turn to for their protection and freedom. Sometimes what is wrong in the eyes of an oppressive system is really the right recourse. And I like how the term justifiable is raised in this session, because to put the term justifiable here is actually an issue of, we're talking about an issue of justice. Was it just? And before one can answer that, the first thing to ask is, what kind of justice are we talking about? Right? Justice should be justice. There shouldn't be any version or side of justice for this or justice. It's just justice, period. But unfortunately, that's the exact opposite today. Justice is only serving, I hate to say, no, but the privileged, the powerful, the rich. Take a look at, for example, our how do you call that one? That penal process. When you are penal ba tawag doon? When you are, for example, accused of something at wala kang pampiyansa, kahit hindi ka naman guilty, you cannot bail out, then immediately you are put to jail. But for the privileged ones, they can go out of it whether they're guilty or not because they have the money to do so. That kind of justice that we're talking about, where people are guilty but they are, running for a public office, and sometimes, people are innocent and they're in jail. How justifiable it is if you're helpless already and you put, matters in your own hands, just like what happened in the story, then I would say it's a yes. It is justifiable. It is necessary. And if the question is it justifiable, and the assumption is that the justice that is for the people is what we're talking about, then I would say it's a justice that is worth pursuing. But if it's justice in the perspective of, whoever is, that those few privileged ones, then that's not justice at all.
That reminds me of that BLM, when BLM riots were happening and people were like so against it na parang, do you have to take matters into your own hand? Do you have to burn things to the ground to get the attention?
Right.
And I kept on thinking parang, why would you demonize loud riots if you did not listen to the silent ones? There are still riots up to this day is because you never listened when they were trying to be diplomatic about it. Um, so the question I have for you, for both of you, is can one person make a difference against a system that is so ingrained and is built on fire and blood? And that's a Game of Thrones reference. If you if you caught that.
Can one person make a difference against a fire and blood system? I wouldn't directly say yes or no, but possible. Possible. If one can ignite another one, which later ignites more, then change is possible. It's possible. And however, uh, it is always messy or bloody. Okay, you know what history already says, diba? Historically, what we have today as peace is built on revolution of blood, revolution of killings and fighting for their space, fighting for what they believe is right, fighting for the majority instead of just the powerful ones. And revolutions that are always bloody and gruesome is, just like, fire and blood, is built on the foundation of probably the few making a difference, the few standing for what is right. It's not easy, it's not quick, it's not peaceful at all, it's not a good picture like, how we see probably, the idea of what unity is today. But it's possible. It's possible. When you stand for and make a difference, it's possible. Again, it's not an explicit just yes or a no, but it's possible. And I hope it will be realized today.
There was a big debate before with between to answer that question, I have to somehow tell this narration first. There's a debate before between existentialism and essentialism, diba? And of course, they said that essentialism precedes existence, but Sartre would always counter this. He said that existentialism precedes essence. And with
Mm,
that in mind, let's go back to our history because whether we like it or not, history is built on the side of the elite, right? And even Rizal loves the country so much that he even died for it, but he was positioned as a myth or an ideology. And so far, all of these both of these fictions that we've dealt with um talk about revolutions, 'di ba? But 'di ba, meron doon na in El Fili there was the rape of Maria Clara, Simon confessing as Ibarra and such. And pero where can this in this particular space within this ideology, it's difficult to think in that fiction of revolution. 'Di ba? That's why only after said publication, after only said people was instigated with these kinds of things. Kasi walang revolution na nangyari in these texts in both of these texts. 'Di ba? So, and the narratives, if because both of them are at the end of the day, they're narratives, they're fiction. And the narratives, again, if described repeatedly, we are framing an alienation, and we are that's the point of literature. That's why we read literature, because we want to feel the stone is stony in a way, 'di ba? So at the end of the day, when we read these kinds of literature, yes, to answer your question, it is possible to do so, but it is possible only through various, only once we realize that there is no way to get out of the system, that we are as Bart's would say, the small s and the big S in structuralism, diba? Kasi in structuralism, we focus on the text. But now we are in an age of post-structuralism. We have to ask ourselves, for whom was the text written for?
So would reconfiguring the system be enough to remedy its damages? Or should there be a total erasure of society to build a new one? Is that even possible?
Oh.
Not really total erasure, because in as you've observed in Latin American culture, especially in Latin American literature, it's really difficult for them to forget. Remember, in 100 Years of Solitude, it took them 100 years, and even Gabriel Garcia Marquez mentioned during his before he the time of his death, I don't want to be remembered out for the solitude of Latin America. I don't want to be remembered as only the sole author of 100 Years of Solitude. But as you can see, how Allende, Llosa, Borges, all of them gave emphasis to the importance of memory. Because, like what Sir Percy said, if we don't learn from the mistakes of our past, these texts were written in 1952 and 1960s. We will still fall prey in repeating what we swore not to do again, right? So yes, it is possible that we have a new system, but it's not. I would personally, I don't want to completely erase or build an imagined memory. I don't. There's a collective forgetfulness or imagined memory. It's as dangerous as erasing the system.
And the idea of reconfiguring the system is a very sensitive discussion if you bring it up today, but at the same time a very interesting one for that matter. No, try to contextualize that in our setting right now. We are very near election, and in the recent weeks, the recent months, even we hear one term repeatedly. In fact, not just in the recent months, but we hear this term every 3 or 6 years. Pagbabago, diba? Change. That's always the banner of whoever is running for whatever office. Pagbabago, change. And it's always innate in us to want to have a reboot, a change. That's why politicians would use that term so that people would ride with the innate desire for change. Laging gusto ng pagbabago. Diba? Meron pa tayong change is coming. Whatever you want to put there just to, I'm sorry, I just said it. Okay, whatever you want to put there just to be able to communicate that reconfiguration or that desire for change, for pagbabago, because none of the systems of the past worked totally perfectly. Di ba? Kaya nga gustong-gusto natin lagi ng pagbabago. Okay? None of those systems work for the interest of the common people. It has always been good, catchy term disguising personal interest, family affairs, or political dynasty affairs, the engagement of the powerful and the influential, never about the people, never about the common masses. Hence, we always go back to the desire to change the system. Okay, and that's what the soul of these two literary pieces is actually echoing to all of us. I would say an oppressive system, regardless of how many times you reconfigure it, will still be oppressive once it's built in favor of the few ones. But no amount of reconfiguration can change the damages that has already been done. What we need is the abandoning of the old system and the building of a new one. Built for the people, by the people. Not for the few, but for the masses, for everybody.
Isn't every act of subversion a form of violence in the system? And I would also add that if the point of subversion is to contradict an existing authority, is it then considered divisive? And does literature, as one of the forefronts of this act, really confuse and damage society?
Dito tayo magpo-fall under sa what we call intentional fallacy. Because
Tama.
there's no such thing as a perfect reader. What I read, what I interpret is different from how you read or how you interpret. So going back to how to Dante Alighieri and his letter to Discalia, he devised a way on how to read literature. First, you have to be familiar with the language. Second, you have to be familiar with all of the allusions, mythological, literary, and so on and so forth. Then there comes, and that's why it's never a perfect circle when you're reading literature, because the imperfect one there is the moral clause. So what my morals will might be different from yours. So if you've read literature and then you have this instinct and this gut feeling that, hey, I can change the system because I've read How to Kill a Mockingbird and such, diba? We've known already how the conspiracy theory of that particular book is, and how many persons were involved um, in dealing with that. But these fictions, especially these two, these are the necessary fictions that we need to structure a reality that we want. Because dystopian or not ideal may be their situation. We already identified what we don't want from our system. I agree with what Sir Percy said, especially of the of abandoning the old system completely. Kasi kung hindi, nagiging trapo tayo eh. We're just repeating all of those dirts and all of those things. But at that way, I hope we still manage at the end of the day to really to not to remember those kinds of mistakes in order to avoid them again, diba?
And just to add to what Ma'am Bethina already said, no, the question is is literature really does literature really confuse and damage society? Diba? If you look at that question, there's an assumption of how powerful literature is already, and I agree. Literature is always powerful, always echoing. I would always say to my students that literature is always timely and timeless wherever it's written, whenever it's timely and timeless. Even if it's a mythological piece, even if it's like a classic, it is timely during their time, it is timely today, it's timeless. And that's how powerful literature is. Literature is very powerful that it can break someone or something, like a system or group of people. And as they say, words are powerful, that, popular saying, words are powerful. And that's what literature is. Words, letters, the art, humanities. It's very powerful that it can destroy systems, even oppressions, and can inspire to build another one. Think about, for example, the underground writings during war, or let's, huwag na tayong lumayo, di ba? The books banned during martial law. We have Ninochka Rosca, we have Kerima Polotan Tuvera, all of these writings, Efshane Lose, and more. And all of this legacy, rich legacy of Philippine literature that illustrates the vicarious, significant human experience of the oppressed. These are divisive. It's hostile, but to the oppressors, to the system, to the few privileged ones. That's how powerful literature is. Yes, you probably you are asking if the point of subversion is to contradict existing authority, is it then considered divine? Yes, it is, and I hope that it is to the oppressors. I hope that it is to the powerful, to the few ones. Diba? That's how critical and powerful literature is. Yeah.
All right. So, based on the literary texts we have been discussing, what reminds you most about your context? And how do you think people approach and resolve these affairs?
Before I answer that, I just want to clarify what Sir Percy just said regarding the writers. Yes, Ninochka was banned. Karima wasn't though. She was the official
Right.
biographer of Imelda. Pero
Yeah.
what she had to do was she was Focus magazine was the only because there
Mm.
was censorship then, diba? So Focus magazine, she was Karima found this magazine, and only then can literary people, writers, here can you publish. That's why I don't know that gyro critics condemn and do not want to touch Karima. But if you could look at it in that particular angle, what she had to do in order for literature to still continue, that's something that you can be that can really be thought of right now, diba? Of what context do you remind us of these two texts the most? Probably Latin American literature. Until now, it's very much still, the context of it is still relevant. The context, because me, I tend to dwell into psychoanalysis and identifying the structure. But again, I don't want it's there's no way to get out of the structure. But to assume that the structure does not matter, that's some other thing. So the context probably that you can apply now to these texts is like what Sir Percy said. It's elections coming up, and not just in our nation. I think Korea had theirs last month. And yeah, to contextualize, and even in Latin America, our most recent about I think a year ago, that the king of Spain was using the tax dollars of people in order to fund his hunting experience. Yeah, the context is that literature is not just an outlet, so to
Right.
speak. It's not just something that you write for pleasure, you write because you were inspired to do so, but you're right at the but you're writing at the end of the day, the context of it, it's what makes us human. As simple as that. You're right, because it's the humane thing to do, that in this kind of experience we are somehow interconnected, not just because of suffering or the context of what's happening to our nation now, but also because of the significant human experience that we have. That's why we read, we still go to bookstores, and we still see kilig whenever we see a new book, or an author that we've wanted so long, na finally after several years magpa-publish ka na this year and such, right? So yun, yeah, I think that's the context of whole literature, is to be human.
And what's in the stories that we were talking about, maybe particularly in Fahrenheit 451, that is still relevant, if not similar to this day and age? I guess the issue of censorship is also present there. In Fahrenheit 451, we see a lot of that, basically by the book burning, by the media being controlled, if not being regulated, being checked by the ministry. We have in exchange oversaturation of their own version of media. Instead of reading or glancing at a piece of art, then you are conditioned by the government to just watch. Diba? Sabi nga dun sa novel, there are huge televisions in their houses, like exaggeratedly huge televisions, instead of owning your own book. Diba? Everything is regulated. Censorship, government surveillance. These are some of the issues that are present in the story that I would say is still happening today, or happening, hopefully not anymore in the coming, in the coming years. But something that we should be worried about, something that we should be conscious about. That these things, just like how Bethina said it, no, sort of like a prophecy of what's happening, and you just it's not something that you wake up today and see na, oy, grabe, we're being censored today, or grabe, pinasara yung media, or grabe, everything is regulated. But it's something that we probably allowed to happen in our own little ways, in our own little apathy, in our own, neglect of not calling out things that we should call out. Then we regularize, if not normalize these things, and boom, it's happening today. So that kind of foreshadowing in Fahrenheit 451 and those days are, basically things that we should be conscious about today. That issue of even the oversaturation of media, in not just the banning or the control of media, but us like being the overglorification of whatever form of media we have today. It's sad, for example, that when you listen to our younger generation talk about what they want to be in the future, instead of talking about wanting to be this and that, like our generation, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an astronaut, may mga ganyan pa tayo, di ba? Today, I want to be in PBB, not that it's wrong, but that's already what we see. I want to be a blogger, I want to be monetized, and again, those platforms, if used correctly, fine and good, but you also see how times have changed. Diba? The battle now is in media, the battle now is in social media, and it's already being used it's being weaponized against people. Diba? We see that in the story, and we see that today as well. And I hope that these reminders from these pieces of literature are things that's why we have to go back to literature. That's why we have to include literature in our curriculum already, because we keep on reducing the curriculum. It has already been repeated, and instead what we do is add things that or subjects or courses that dami ko lang sinabi, that we wanted to just produce employees, just to produce manpower. And we're forgetting the soul of everything. We're forgetting humanities, history, literature, philosophy. 'Di ba? Tinatanggal natin sa curriculum, and then we're wondering why people are like this today. Why people cannot even see what's factual and what is not. why people would have the courage to say respect my opinion if there's nothing respectful about someone's opinion. Yeah, so that's actually the effect of omitting literature, omitting the humanities in our curriculum. And we have been warned by the literatures that we're talking about today. We have been warned. And I hope that this warning will continue echoing in the next generations.
I agree. And from the perspective of like us as literature students or humanities students, when you see one of the biggest news providers of the country be shut down and people do not mourn but cheer for its shutting down, for its shutdown, you realize that the system or whoever is in charge have made it so or have made the narrative that the news or literature or journalism no longer holds a certain credibility in society, and that's dangerous. I love this quote. It's non verbatim. I can't remember actually verbatim, but it's they silenced journalists and no one knew what happened after that. Because literature, journalism, academics, diba, they're for, they're at the forefront of our democracy or our liberation. Unfortunately, kahit na even if right now we're not just limited to our oppression, we're also limited to the construct of time. So are there specific themes or messages in the text that the panel wants to emphasize or reiterate to the youth?
I would like to emphasize or reiterate the repetition of history. So I don't know if, well, most probably you weren't alive at this during this time yet, but I think Sir Percy and I are familiar with this. But how during the martial law period, how things such as bomba films were used as the people's distraction. I would like to somehow find a connection that nowadays it's no longer bomba films but the promulgation of fake news. So before, to distract people from the martial law, from the oppression and such, we have bomba films. The theaters were open, and these were the films that were really in published. But there's one person ang nagpabagsak sa bomba films, and that is Nora Honor. So her films that were directed by Ishmael Bernal and such, and even Manila by Night was even censored, and it was shown as its name changed, instead from Manila by Night, it was City After Dark, and it was reduced here, and it was only shown here, even though that Bernal himself was even imprisoned because of such. But it was only showed here because after it won awards abroad. So we have to somehow still, that's what Latin America is doing right now. We have to still market ourselves that, hey, this is still happening here. Hey, this is, and what's scary is that this kind of power, it's still happening in today's society. Is like what Sir Percy brilliantly explained a while ago, that paulit-ulit na. It's really dangerous na people would rather watch a TikTok video, and there's completely nothing wrong with that. But people would rather do other things than simply open and get lost in a book. Because sometimes we really need to we really need to go back to the basics of why we love it, why we love literature, and this kilig feeling that it gives us, diba? So primarily the context is that with this kind of power, we really have to be cautious. We really have to exercise cautious at the same time, and re-educate ourselves, even though that these are the books na at Fahrenheit 451, honest to goodness, I took a glance back out of it because the last time I read this, I was still in college. So those, diba, Sir Percy? So, diba, it's there's nothing wrong with rereading a text, kasi um I actually do that with Derrida. Every time I read Derrida, it's like he's saying something new na naman. So yeah, it we have to always keep, especially us na literature majors tayo, we really have to go back to why we love books.
Para sa akin naman, siguro one message, and you already know this, I've been repeatedly emphasizing this one, and gasgas na rin siya, but never forget. Okay, that's what I think the message of the story. There are so many though, but one of the messages of the story, Fahrenheit 451, and I guess something that we should imbibe today. Never forget, collective forgetfulness again is a dangerous thing. Do not let the hard-earned freedom purchased by the generations of the past be taken once again away from us. Do not let that happen. Know your history, know your literature, be informed, be critical. I guess that's one of the things that so many things that I want to leave behind to our audience today. Yeah,
And
All
learn to
right.
research.
exactly.
That's a lot, but thank you so much. On behalf of the SDev and of Literature Society, Ma'am Bethina and Sir Percy, thank you so much for giving us time of day and joining us today. We appreciate everything you have imparted sa amin. Okay, thank you very much. And that's it for our episode of Litong Litalks. We hope to see you on the next parts of this podcast.